2 people are dead after a blast on a farm close to Poland's border with Ukraine. Now, Poland's foreign minister said earlier it was a Russian-made missile, but the Polish president says it's still too soon to be sure. If it is true, though, that would be the first time a Russian weapon has fallen on a NATO country since the war began. This is obviously triggering a lot of concern tonight, but also calls for calm as officials try to determine what exactly happened. Briar Stewart starts our coverage tonight with what we know.
For months, emergency crews have responded to explosions in Ukraine, but this is just across the border in Poland. A blast at a grain facility killed 2 people. Poland says it's too early to say who fired the rocket that hit the site. The Polish government convened an emergency meeting. We have just decided a moment ago an increased readiness of some military units in Poland. Poland's president said the country will likely invoke NATO Article 4 Wednesday, calling on members to discuss any concerns raised by a country. Officials from NATO Baltic nations are vowing to defend every inch of NATO territory, but the language from other countries, including Canada, is more cautious.
We're following up the situation very closely, and of course, we'll be having important meetings today with allies.
U.S. President Joe Biden spoke with Poland's president and promised to support the investigation. U.S. officials also can't confirm Russia fired the missile. Russia's defense ministry denies claims it did, calling them a deliberate provocation in order to escalate the situation.
The Russians don't want to have a response. They don't want to hit NATO because NATO then would be free to attack Russian units either in the Black Sea or in the skies over Ukraine or Russian units in Ukraine.
All this as Russia unleashed a barrage of missiles against Ukraine Tuesday, hitting at least 2 residential buildings and taking out more of the country's energy infrastructure, leaving streets darkened and hundreds of thousands without power. The missiles were launched shortly after Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed G20 leaders virtually. After the explosions in Poland, Zelensky released a new message with the warning. The terror is not limited to our national borders. Perhaps not. But whether what happened in Poland was intentional remains unclear. Briar Stewart, CBC News, London.
So let's bring in David Common now, who's in Ottawa. David, I know you know that border very well. You've flown over it in AWACS. The first priority here, figuring out what happened. Walk us through the possibilities.
Well, 2 possibilities are who really fired it. The first being, was it a Russian missile that went off target and into Poland, or was it a Ukrainian missile that was trying to take down a Russian missile that itself went off target? Quite likely, this was an accident. The early assessments pointing towards that, not intentional, not striking a target of particular military value. But it also seems in some ways that this was inevitable given the amount of activity that happens along that border, the weapons shipments, the increasing levels of attacks from the Russians recently. Quite likely it was an S-300 missile. That's a missile that's operated by both sides. And so the forensics work will now be underway to try to figure out who fired it.
So, David, given all that, what are the options on the table when NATO meets?
Okay, so Article 5 is the big one, and that is, we've been attacked, come and help us, all the other NATO members. That is less likely to be invoked at this point. Only one time has that ever been used in NATO's history, and that was after 9/11. More likely is Article 4, which is basically a signal that says, our territorial security has been threatened. What are we as an alliance going to do? And it will be quite likely a strong signal to Russia that this can't happen again.
All right, David Common in Ottawa. Thanks, David.
Thank you.